My name is Clark Miller, and the day my own daughter told me to either serve her husband or leave my own house, I realized everything I had sacrificed meant nothing to them. For years, I paid the bills, the mortgage, her college tuition, even her wedding, but in return, I was treated like an unwelcome guest. That night, instead of breaking down as they expected, I smiled, grabbed my suitcase, and walked away. What they didn't know was that my departure wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would unravel every lie they had built on my back. By the time they realized, it was far too late to undo. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. You will either serve my husband or get out of my house. Those were the words that ended 5 years of sacrifice in a single breath. I had just walked through the front door, grocery bags cutting into my palms, when Harry barked at me from the recliner I had bought with Martha, my late wife. He didn't even look up from the basketball game. "Grab me another beer," he ordered, as if I were nothing more than his servant. My daughter Tiffany entered moments later, her eyes carrying the same cold authority. "Dad, just get him the beer. Don't make this into a fight." The ultimatum was laid before me with no hesitation, no hint of gratitude for everything I had done. I stood there frozen between the weight of my memories and the sting of betrayal. For years I had told myself it was love that made me cover their mortgage, buy their groceries, and pay off their car insurance. I told myself Martha would have wanted me to keep them afloat. But in that moment, standing under the roof I had built with my own hands, I saw clearly it wasn't love holding this family together. It was convenience. I was a walking wallet, a servant in my own home. Harry leaned forward, his smirk dripping with arrogance. "Look, Clark, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you want to stay here, you play ball." My daughter nodded as if her husband's command were gospel. "Dad, you have to decide right now." My heart hammered against my chest, but my voice stayed calm. "All right." Harry grinned, thinking I had caved. "Good. Now about that beer." But I didn't move toward the kitchen. Instead, I turned down the hallway. "I'll pack," I said quietly. His smirk collapsed. Tiffany's face faltered. For the first time in years, they realized I wasn't going to bend. I pulled my suitcase from the closet shelf, the same one I had bought decades ago for my honeymoon with Martha. As I folded shirts and tucked away my medication, I heard them whispering frantically in the living room. They expected me to apologize, to shuffle back out with a cold beer in my hand. But my hands moved with purpose, each folded shirt, a statement I would not be humiliated in my own house. When I wheeled my suitcase past them, neither said a word. Tiffany's lips trembled. Harry sat upright, no longer smug, but tense, unsure of what he had just unleashed. I opened the front door without looking back. My Buick started on the first try, its familiar rumble steadier than my daughter's loyalty had ever been. As the house faded in my rearview mirror, so did the illusion that I still had a family under that roof. They thought I would crawl back, but they had no idea what a lifetime in banking had taught me. Dignity isn't given, it's defended. And for the first time, I was ready to defend mine. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach, the kind of sterile scent that reminded me I was no longer in my home, but in a borrowed space. The Pine Lodge wasn't much thin curtains, a rattling heater, a bedspread patterned with faded flowers, but it offered something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I sat on the edge of the bed with my suitcase half opened, staring at the framed picture of Martha I had wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Her smile seemed to steady me, as if reminding me this choice wasn't weakness, it was survival. That first night's silence pressed down heavier than I expected. No television blaring sports in the background, No clinking of beer bottles left on my coffee table, no sharp words from Harry disguised as jokes. For the first time in years, the house I had sacrificed for wasn't draining me anymore. It was behind me. Yet in the quiet memories flooded in, I thought back to Tiffany's college years. $40,000 a year at that fancy private school she insisted on. I had worked overtime at the bank reviewing loan applications late into the night while my hands cramped from signing forms. I skipped vacations, put off repairing the roof, even sold my old fishing boat, all so she could graduate debt-free. She never asked how much it cost me, and I never told her. That was a father's duty, I thought. Then came her wedding. $25,000, nearly all of it from my retirement savings. Harry's parents couldn't contribute much, and I didn't want embarrassment to taint Tiffany's day. I covered the flowers, the hall, even the dress. I remember her tears of joy that day, how she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Back then, I believed those words would echo through the years. Instead, they faded the moment Harry stepped into her life as the dominant voice. And of course, the house. $80,000 from my retirement fund for their down payment. Every month since then, I'd quietly shouldered their mortgage and utilities. My Social Security check became their safety net. Groceries, car insurance, unexpected bills if they needed it, I provided. I convinced myself I was keeping Martha's memory alive, honoring her wish for Tiffany to have the life we never could. But what I had really done was allow my daughter to forget what sacrifice looked like. The plastic motel chair creaked under me as I spread my paperwork across the small table. Bank statements, insurance policies, account numbers I knew by heart. Each page was a reminder of where my money had gone and where it no longer would. For years, I'd been a silent financier of their comfortable life. Tonight, I decided that silence had ended. I leaned back and let the truth sink in. They thought I'd return with an apology, maybe with another check to cover their next bill. But I wasn't going back. I wasn't writing another check. The humiliation of being told to serve or leave had done more than bruise my pride. It had awakened me. They had chosen their path, and now it was time for me to choose mine. Sunday morning broke gray and overcast, fitting for the hollow feeling in my chest. I pulled back the thin motel curtains and stared at the empty parking lot. For the first time in decades, I had no one expecting me to make breakfast, no one relying on me to keep the lights on, no one waiting for me to cover their mistakes. You'd think freedom would feel lighter. Instead, it pressed heavy, because behind that freedom was the realization of how badly I had been used. I brewed the weak motel coffee and sat down at the little desk with my journal. For years, that journal had been nothing more than a place to jot down expenses and medical reminders. Now, as I flipped open its leather cover, it became something different, a record of truth. I wrote down every dollar I had poured into Tiffany and Harry's lives. Tuition $160,000, wedding $25,000, house down payment $80,000, mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, insurance, credit cards. The list stretched across page after page. My pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. I paused, staring at those numbers. They weren't just expenses. They were pieces of my life years, shaved off my retirement nights I'd spent working overtime while others enjoyed their families. Every line was proof that I had been more than generous. And still, it hadn't been enough. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, flashing missed call. Tiffany. Then another Harry's number this time. By noon, there were 6 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. I didn't owe them explanations anymore. For once, I let silence speak for me. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache of betrayal. I remembered Tiffany as a child climbing onto my lap during thunderstorms, whispering that she felt safe with me. She used to braid dandelions into crowns and place them on my head, laughing like the world was ours. How had that little girl grown into a woman who would stand by, while her husband demanded I serve him like a butler? I reached for Martha's photo, the one I'd tucked carefully into my suitcase. Her eyes seemed to ask the same question. Maybe I had enabled it. Maybe I had mistaken providing for parenting. Maybe in trying to protect Tiffany from hardship, I had stolen from her the chance to learn responsibility. The thought stung, but it also steeled me. I couldn't undo the past, but I could change the future. My hands moved to the laptop I had carried with me. I logged into my bank account, scrolling through the familiar balances. For years, I had linked those accounts to Tiffany and Harry's lives: automatic mortgage payments, insurance policies, credit cards, where Tiffany was an authorized user. All of it tied my lifeline to theirs, and all of it could be undone with a few keystrokes. I didn't make the calls that day. Not yet. But as I closed the laptop, I knew exactly what had to come next. They had given me an ultimatum. Now it was my turn. Monday morning, I sat at the small motel desk, the weak smell of instant coffee curling in the air, and spread out my paperwork like a general preparing for battle. Years at the bank had taught me how systems worked, where levers of power could be pulled quietly and effectively. For half a decade, I had used that knowledge to keep Tiffany and Harry afloat. Now I would use it to let them sink. The first call went to the bank. My voice stayed calm, even polite, as I navigated through the automated menus. When I finally reached a live representative, I gave my account number and request without hesitation. Cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street. Effective immediately. The clerk on the other end sounded surprised, even concerned. Are you certain, Mr. Miller, this payment has been active for over 5 years? I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. I'm certain. The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial support. Clicks of typing followed, then the quiet confirmation. It's done. Next was insurance. For 3 years, I had carried Harry's truck and Tiffany's car under my policy, nearly $300 each month, disappearing for vehicles I never touched. When the agent asked when I wanted the removal to take effect, I answered firmly, today. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with credit card companies. Tiffany was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts, and every month I watched charges accumulate, purchases I had never made, bills I never saw coming. Remove her immediately, I told each representative. Any outstanding balances remain my responsibility, but no new charges are to be allowed. With each call, I felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't noticed pressing on my chest for years was finally lifting. When I hung up the last call, the motel room was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the stack of confirmation numbers I had written down. Mortgage canceled, insurance revoked, credit cards blocked. For the first time in years, my money was mine. The phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Tiffany, then Harry, then Tiffany once more. I let them pile up unanswered, my curiosity tinged with a strange calm. I didn't need to hear the panic in their voices to know it was there. I walked to the window and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, an elderly couple was packing their car, moving around each other with ease born of years together. The man loaded the suitcases, the woman gave gentle instructions, and for a moment I remembered Martha and me splitting a slice of apple pie at the diner after her doctor's appointments. She would have smiled at what I had done today. She would have said it was long overdue. I wasn't done. This was only the first step. But for the first time in years, I felt the quiet strength of a man reclaiming his dignity. They had given me a choice: obey or leave. I had chosen a third option: fight back on my own terms. By Wednesday, my voicemail was a museum of desperation. I sat at the small motel table with a notebook open, listening to each message in order, documenting the unraveling of their composure. The first few were casual: Tiffany asking if the bank had made some mistake, Harry grumbling about the car insurance lapse. But by midweek, the tone shifted. Dad, the bank says you stopped the automatic mortgage payment. They want the full amount by Friday or they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Please call me. Tiffany's voice cracked with panic. The next was Harry, his tone sharper, meaner. Clark, you need to fix this right now. I've got people asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats. I leaned back in the creaky motel chair, letting the words wash over me. For years, their problems had been mine. Now their problems were finally staying where they belonged. By Friday, the messages had multiplied into 22. Tiffany's last one was barely more than sobs. Please, Dad, we can work something out. Just come home. But home wasn't what they imagined anymore. It was a battleground, and I had already shifted the terrain. I deleted each message after listening, not out of cruelty, but necessity. I had spent too many years carrying their burdens, too many nights worrying about bills that weren't mine. Each deleted message was another stone lifted from my back. Still, I knew panic wouldn't be the end of it. People like Harry never stopped at desperation, they lashed out. And Tiffany, caught between him and me, would cling to whatever narrative kept her world intact. I had to prepare. That evening, I walked down Main Street, letting the cold Montana air clear my head. Kalispell was a small town, the kind where stories spread faster than wildfire. I didn't need to shout my side of the story. I only had to hold my ground. The truth had a way of traveling on its own. I stopped at Annie's Diner, the place Martha and I had loved, and ordered coffee at the corner booth. The waitress, who'd known me for 20 years, gave me a curious look. Heard you're staying out at Pine Lodge, Clark. Everything all right? I stirred sugar into the steaming mug, considering how much to share. Just needed some space, I said simply. Her eyes softened. Well, you do what's best for you. That was all I needed: one sympathetic ear, one nod of understanding. In towns like this, support spread just as fast as rumors. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and created a new folder: evidence. Into it went scanned copies of account closures, confirmation numbers, and a detailed timeline of events. If Harry thought he could bully me into resuming my old role, he was mistaken. This time, I was documenting everything. When I finally turned off the lamp and lay down in the stiff motel bed, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. They had demanded obedience. Instead, I had given them silence proof and consequences. And this was only the beginning. Saturday morning, I pushed open the diner door and was greeted by the warm scent of bacon grease and coffee. Annie's bell chimed as usual, but this time a familiar voice cut through the clatter of dishes. Clark Miller. Well, I'll be damned. I turned to see Bob Harrison, an old colleague from First National Bank, folding his newspaper under one arm. We had worked side by side for 15 years before his transfer to the main branch. And though time had carved more lines into his face, his eyes still carried that sharp banker's instinct. Bob, I said, shaking his hand. Been a long time. He slid into the booth across from me without waiting for an invitation. Heard you're out at Pine Lodge. Everything all right? The waitress set down 2 mugs of steaming coffee, buying me a moment to choose my words. Family situation, I said finally. Needed some space. Bob studied me, lips pressed tight. Clark, I don't know how to say this, but your son-in-law tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back. My cup stopped halfway to my lips. What kind of fast one? He came in with paperwork claiming your house was his. Tried to take out a $50,000 home equity loan. Brought documents and everything. Looked real until we ran the title search. Bob shook his head. All came back to you, of course. Clean title, no co-signers, no claim for him. The words landed like cold water down my spine. I set the cup carefully on the saucer, my hands suddenly too steady, too deliberate. And when exactly was this December? Maybe January. I handled the application personally. Clark, that wasn't a mistake. The documents were forged. This was deliberate fraud. I leaned back, letting the hum of the diner fade. Harry hadn't just been mooching off me. He had been planning to steal from me outright long before that ultimatum in my living room. Did you report it? We flagged it internally, rejected the application, and kept copies of everything. But since no money changed hands, the legal line's a little gray. Still, his name's blacklisted in our system now. I nodded, the weight of years of sacrifice suddenly sharper. I remembered the tuition, the wedding, the down payment, all the times Harry had smiled across my dinner table claiming money was tight. And while I was covering their bills, he was fabricating ownership of the home Martha and I had built together. Clark Bob lowered his voice. I also heard word about gambling debts. Pretty substantial. Jim Morrison might know more, you remember him, Detective Morrison. He mentioned Harry's irregular at Glacier Peaks Casino. I drained the last of my coffee, ignoring the bitter taste. Gambling, forgery, lies stacked on lies. What I once thought was arrogance was now revealed as strategy. Harry had never seen me as family. I was leverage. A means to bankroll his games until he found a way to take it all. Bob, I said quietly, thank you. You may have just given me the missing piece. And as I stepped back into the cold morning air, I knew this wasn't about reclaiming my dignity anymore. It was about defending everything Martha and I had built from a man who had planned to steal it all along. That afternoon, I drove straight from the diner to the Flathead County Courthouse. The brick building loomed against the winter sky, a place that had once intimidated me when I was younger. Now it felt less like a monument of bureaucracy and more like an ally. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking in to help someone else with their paperwork. I was walking in to reclaim my life. The clerk's office was on the second floor behind a frosted glass window with a small brass sign. A woman in her 50s looked up as I approached, her hands poised above a keyboard. How can I help you, sir? I need to file an eviction notice, I said, sliding across the deed and my driver's license. Her brows lifted. This is for your daughter's residence. It's my residence, I corrected evenly. My house, my signature on the loan. They were living there under a verbal agreement, mutual respect contribution to expenses. Both conditions have been violated. She studied the deed, then compared it to the eviction documents I'd already filled out at the motel. My years in banking had trained me to anticipate every blank line, every required detail. I wasn't walking in unprepared. You understand, this begins a 30-day notice period, she said, stamping the first page with a heavy thud. If they contest it, a hearing will be scheduled. Otherwise, the sheriff will serve final papers once the deadline passes. I nodded. How soon before they're notified? Sheriff's Department handles service. Typically within 48 hours. As she slid the stamped copies back to me, I felt the weight of official authority settle into my hands. For years, Tiffany and Harry had used guilt and entitlement to bend me. Now I had the law to straighten my spine. Walking back to my car, the winter air bit at my face, but it felt refreshing. This wasn't just a father's quiet rebellion anymore. It was a legal declaration. They could scream, threaten, and manipulate, but the sheriff's papers would speak louder than their words. Still, I knew eviction alone wasn't enough. Harry wasn't just lazy. He was desperate. Desperate men looked for loopholes, and I couldn't afford to underestimate him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, Detective Jim Morrison. Jim and I had known each other through church committees years back. His daughter had even graduated with Tiffany. If Harry's gambling was as bad as Bob hinted, Jim would know. And more importantly, he could document what I was beginning to suspect, that Harry's threats weren't just bluster. They were part of a dangerous pattern. I left a message with his office, then slid behind the wheel of my Buick. For the first time since Martha's passing, I felt like I was moving with purpose again. Not just reacting, not just patching over someone else's chaos. As I pulled onto Main Street, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines on my face were deeper, my hair thinner, but my eyes looked sharper than they had in years. This wasn't defeat. This was the beginning of a fight I should have started long ago. Detective Jim Morrison's office was tucked away in the back corner of the police station, a cramped space lined with overflowing filing cabinets and the faint smell of burnt coffee. When I knocked on the door frame, Jim looked up, and for a moment the years peeled away. His hair had grayed, his shoulders stooped a little, but his handshake was still firm. "Clark Miller," he said, motioning me inside. "Haven't seen you since the church fundraiser. What brings you into my corner of the world?" I took a seat across from his cluttered desk, placing my folder of documents between us. "Information gathering. I think my son-in-law's been digging a hole deeper than even I imagined." His brow furrowed. "Harry Thompson." I nodded, then explained how Harry had stood over me demanding beer in my own house, how Tiffany had joined him in issuing that ultimatum, how I walked out with my suitcase instead of surrendering. I laid out the mortgage payments, the insurance, the groceries, all the quiet sacrifices that had kept them afloat. Then I told him about Bob Harrison's revelation, the forged documents, the attempt to take out a loan on my home. Jim leaned back, arms crossed, listening with the kind of stillness only seasoned detectives carried. When I finished, he scribbled a few notes and gave a long sigh. "Clark, I'll be honest with you. Harry's name has come up more than once. He's a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino. Poker tables mostly. Higher stakes lately." My stomach tightened. "Any idea how much different creditors, different amounts?" Jim said carefully. "We don't have exact figures since gambling debts aren't always reported formally, but based on what I've heard, $18,000 to $20,000 wouldn't be an exaggeration." I shook my head slowly, gripping the arms of the chair. 18,000. Enough to buy a decent car. Enough to bury a family in debt. And all while I was paying his bills. "Who does he owe?" I asked. Jim's expression darkened. "Some legitimate lenders, some not. The legitimate ones are already impatient. The others, let's just say they don't typically file paperwork when they collect. He's been stalling for 6 weeks. He might have 3 left before things get ugly." The words hung heavy in the room. Suddenly, Harry's arrogance made more sense, the beer demand, the smug smile, the ultimatum. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to keep his lifeline from snapping. Jim leaned forward. "Clark, I'll tell you what concerns me most. A man who forges documents to steal from his father-in-law and racks up gambling debts doesn't stop there. He'll escalate. Lies turn to threats. Threats turn to action." I opened my folder and slid across the stamped eviction papers. "That's why I'm here. I want everything documented. If he comes at me again, I want a record strong enough to stand in court." Jim nodded his pen, scratching across a fresh page. "You're doing the right thing. I'll make sure this goes in the file. And Clark, watch your back. Men like Harry don't go quietly." As I left his office, the winter wind cut sharp against my face. Harry thought he'd cornered me with an ultimatum, but now I held something more powerful than fear. I held the truth, and men like Jim ready to stand beside it. Small towns have long memories and quick tongues. By Friday afternoon, I saw just how fast truth could spread when given the right push. My first stop was Miller's Hardware, where I had worked part-time after retiring from the bank. Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from his counter, his forehead creasing with concern. "Clark heard you're staying out at Pine Lodge. Everything okay?" I set down a box of nails I didn't really need and met his eyes. Just needed some space. Family matters got complicated. Tom frowned, then leaned closer. "Complicated, like Harry marching in here yesterday, bragging about how you'd finally lost it. Said you walked out because Tiffany wouldn't let you control every detail of their lives." I let out a quiet breath. Steady. Funny. He didn't mention that I've been paying their mortgage, utilities, and groceries for years, or that I covered Tiffany's tuition and wedding, or that he tried to take out a fraudulent loan on my house. The words hit like a hammer. 3 employees who had wandered closer to listen froze. "Wait. Harry told us his family was supporting you," Dave, the assistant manager, said. "Said you couldn't keep up with bills anymore." I shook my head. He lied. The truth is, I kept them afloat while he gambled at Glacier Peaks. Detective Morrison himself confirmed it. The silence was thick. Then Sarah from the paint counter muttered, "That explains why he always turned down overtime. Said he had other commitments. Guess poker tables count as commitments." By the time I left, their expressions had shifted from concern to indignation. I didn't have to say more. The story would carry itself down Main Street by sundown. My second stop was St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Pastor Williams welcomed me into his office with the same warmth he'd shown after Martha's funeral. "Clark folks are worried. Help me understand what's happening." I sat across from him, folding my hands. "Pastor, for 5 years I supported Tiffany and Harry. Last week they told me I had 2 choices, obey Harry or leave my house. I chose to leave. Since then, Harry's tried to paint me as unstable. But the truth is, I've simply stopped paying for their lives." Pastor Williams studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes the hardest love is allowing people to face their consequences. It sounds like you've been shielding them too long." His words settled over me like a benediction. He wasn't gossiping. He was naming what I had begun to realize: my silence had allowed their arrogance to grow unchecked. Now truth was pruning it back. My final stop was Annie's coffee shop. The place buzzed with the Friday crowd: retirees, young parents, workers winding down. As I sipped my coffee in the corner, I caught snippets of conversation at nearby tables. "Harry owes money all over town. Clark's been paying their bills for years. Always wondered how they afforded that house. I didn't have to stand up and defend myself. The town was already doing it for me." In Kalispell, lies were brittle. Once cracked, they shattered fast. And Harry's carefully built story was already turning to dust. Back in my motel room, I spread the day's notes across the desk like puzzle pieces. Copies of the eviction papers, the bank's confirmation numbers, Detective Morrison's warnings, and now the whispers rolling through town. All of it told a single story. Harry wasn't just lazy or entitled. He was desperate, dishonest, and running out of places to hide. I opened my laptop and created a folder titled Evidence. Into it went scans of every document I had collected so far. Mortgage cancellation, insurance policy adjustments, credit card removals. I even typed out summaries of the conversations with Bob, Harris, and Tom from the hardware store and Pastor Williams. Each note included dates, times, and context. Years in banking had taught me that paper trails were power. Harry could spin lies in a dozen directions, but he couldn't erase ink and signatures. The motel phone rang its shrill tone, breaking the silence. I didn't answer. Instead, I let it click over to voicemail, then replayed the message. Tiffany's voice strained and trembling. "Dad, please call me. Harry says people are talking. The bank, the insurance, the bills, it's all unraveling. I don't know what to do." Her words carried fear, but also something else, an echo of the manipulation I'd heard before. The plea wasn't just for reconciliation. It was for me to resume my old role as savior. I stared at the receiver until the message ended, then deleted it. By Sunday evening, the tally of missed calls had risen past 30. Each one confirmed what I already knew: my absence had exposed the cracks in their carefully crafted facade. They couldn't stand on their own, and the town was beginning to see it. I turned back to my notes. Pattern recognition was second nature to me, and the pattern here was undeniable. Harry's aggression wasn't random, it followed a script. First entitlement, then control. Now, as the financial lifeline snapped, he would escalate into something more dangerous. Lies, threats, maybe worse. That night, Steve Brennan, the manager at Pine Lodge, knocked on my door. A retired Army sergeant, Steve didn't waste words. "Mr. Miller, that son-in-law of yours was hanging around the parking lot, made some guests nervous, muttered something about teaching old fools lessons before he left." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Did you catch it on camera?" Steve nodded. "Got the whole thing. If the police need it, I'll hand it over." When he left, I slipped the USB drive into my evidence folder. Proof of harassment added to the growing pile. Piece by piece, I was building a wall of facts Harry couldn't climb. As I sat back on the motel bed, I realized something important. For years, I had fought their battles in silence, writing checks behind closed doors. Now silence was my weapon. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to argue. All I had to do was keep gathering the truth, let the town watch, and wait for Harry to implode under the weight of his own lies. The first sign of Harry's counterattack came on a cold Tuesday morning. I was sipping burnt motel coffee when the phone rang. Tom from the hardware store. His voice carried that clipped anger of someone who'd just been lied to. "Clark, I think you need to know what Harry's been saying around town. He came in here loud as a freight train, telling everyone you abandoned them without warning. Claims you had some kind of breakdown." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. I'd expected this. Desperate men didn't admit fault. They rewrote the story. "What else did he say?" I asked. "That Tiffany begged you to stay, but you threw them out because you wanted to control every decision. Said there was a family medical emergency, and you refused to help." The words hung heavy, absurd, and cruel at the same time. A medical emergency, that was new. Harry wasn't just painting me as unstable. He was crafting a tragedy designed to pull sympathy his way. By mid-afternoon, 3 more calls trickled in. Mrs. Henderson from church, Pastor Williams himself, even Dave from the paint counter at Miller's. Each repeated the same refrain Harry was telling anyone who'd listen: that I was senile, bitter, and cruel. He was laying the groundwork for doubt, trying to stain my character in the eyes of people who had known me my whole life. That evening, I sat in my motel room with my evidence folder spread across the bed. I didn't panic. I didn't rush into town to defend myself. Instead, I reminded myself of something Martha used to say: "A lie may sprint, but truth always walks you down." I had truth on my side, and unlike Harry, I had patience. Still, I knew perception mattered in a small town. People talked. Stories grew legs. If Harry's narrative took root, it could make my eventual stand harder. That was when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't expected. Detective Morrison. "Clark," he said, his voice low. "I thought you should know Harry was here this morning filing a complaint. Elder abuse of all things. Claims you're being manipulated by people at the bank into making bad financial decisions." I let out a humorless laugh. Elder abuse. That's Rich. He doesn't have medical documentation or witness statements, so we can't move it forward. But Clark, it's clear he's trying to build a paper trail painting you as incompetent, so he can claim authority over your affairs. The pieces clicked in my mind. Harry wasn't just fighting to save face. He was laying the foundation for a legal maneuver, something that could tie up my property, my accounts, maybe even my freedom to make my own decisions. It wasn't just a smear campaign, it was strategy. After we hung up, I added Morrison's warning to my evidence file, the folder growing thicker by the day. Harry thought lies could buy him time, but he hadn't counted on me documenting every step. He hadn't counted on the fact that for the first time, I wasn't playing his game. The motel phone rang just after dusk. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the caller ID showed Tiffany's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came through raw and shaky, thick with tears. "Dad, please don't hang up. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand." I stayed silent, letting her words tumble out. "I'm pregnant," she blurted, "and the stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby." For a moment, my chest tightened. The instinct to protect, to drop everything for her roared up like muscle memory. A grandchild. Martha would have smiled at that, but something in Tiffany's tone rang rehearsed, too clean, like lines she had practiced. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "When did you find out last week?" "Right before everything fell apart." Her voice cracked at just the right moment. "Dad, I can't lose my baby because of money problems. You always said family comes first." "Well, this is family." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Family did come first. That was why I had sacrificed my retirement, my savings, my home. But I had learned something painful these last weeks. Family wasn't about blood alone. It was about respect. "Tiffany, have you seen a doctor about these complications?" I asked carefully. A pause. "Yes, Dr. Richards at the women's clinic." That name struck me immediately. Dr. Richards had been Martha's doctor for years. I knew her well enough to know she would never deny me the truth. "I'll call her office tomorrow," I said. "I'll handle any medical expenses directly." "Dad, no, you can't just call my doctor." "That's private." Tiffany's tone sharpened panic, cutting through the tears. "You're right. She can call me directly if there's a real emergency." I replied, my voice steady. "If my grandchild is truly at risk, I want to know from her." The line went silent, then abruptly disconnected. I set the receiver down and stared at the motel ceiling. The silence pressed in heavier than before. If Tiffany really was pregnant, my actions could ripple into another innocent life. But if this was just another ploy, another scheme crafted by Harry, then giving in now would undo everything I had fought for. I sat back at the desk and opened my evidence folder, adding a new page: phone call, Tiffany claim of pregnancy, no proof provided. My pen pressed hard against the paper as I wrote. I thought about the girl who used to braid dandelion crowns, who once believed her father could protect her from every storm. Was she still in there somewhere, buried beneath the manipulation? Or had Harry's shadow stretched too far? As the motel heater rattled to life, I made myself a promise. If Tiffany wanted to drag me back into chains, she'd have to do it with truth, not tears rehearsed in the mirror. Until then, the evidence spoke louder than her words. It happened outside First National Bank on a crisp Thursday morning. I had stopped in to close an old account when I heard the unmistakable rise of Harry's voice. Loud cutting, meant for an audience. He stood near the sidewalk with a half-circle of townsfolk gathered around him, customers, clerks, even a few retirees enjoying the spectacle. "He's lost his mind," Harry barked, jabbing a finger toward the street as if I were already there. "That old man thinks everyone's stealing from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out of the house. Left her to fend for herself," the words cut, but not the way Harry intended. They weren't daggers. They were rope, desperate attempts to tie down a narrative that was already fraying. When the crowd turned and spotted me exiting the bank, a hush fell. All eyes shifted from Harry's flushed face to mine. He spun around, the red climbing higher into his cheeks. There he is, the man who abandoned his own family. I stepped forward, my voice calm but carrying. "Hello, Harry. How's the gambling debt situation working out?" The question landed like a thunderclap. The crowd murmured, heads swiveling between us. Harry blinked, then sputtered. "What are you talking about?" $18,000, I said clearly, according to Detective Morrison. Glacier Peak's casino poker tables mostly. Interesting how much money someone can lose when they're not paying their own mortgage or utilities. The murmurs grew louder, fragments of disbelief mixing with knowing nods. A few people whispered names, connections, stories they'd heard but never confirmed. Harry's face twisted purple with rage. "You senile old bastard, you can't just cut him off. I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you and Tiffany for 5 years. Can you document where your paychecks went?" The crowd's attention sharpened, their expressions shifting. Harry had built his case on words alone, but I was offering proof. And in a small town, proof was heavier than rumor. His fists clenched, shoulders squared, but he must have seen something in the crowd's faces, doubt, suspicion, the crack in his carefully built facade. He shoved past 2 onlookers, muttering curses under his breath. "This isn't over, Clark." I watched him storm away, the tension in his stride betraying just how close to the edge he was. The crowd lingered, some pulling out phones, others whispering to each other. One man shook his head. 18,000. My God. I didn't need to say more. I simply straightened my coat, nodded to a few familiar faces, and walked calmly toward my car. Let them draw their own conclusions. Let the truth seep through the cracks. Back at the motel, I documented the confrontation in my folder. Public altercation outside bank. Witnesses present. Harry acknowledged by implication. Gambling debts referenced. Every detail mattered. Harry thought his volume could bury my silence. But volume fades. Silence backed by truth endures. And in that moment, the town saw the difference. The night after the bank confrontation, Pine Lodge's neon sign buzzed faintly against the cold air as I sat at the motel desk sorting papers into my growing evidence folder. The silence was broken by a knock at my door, firm, deliberate. When I peered through the peephole, I saw Steve Brennan, the night manager, his posture as rigid as the Army sergeant he once was. "Clark," he said when I opened the door, "thought you should know. That son-in-law of yours was here about 20 minutes ago." I stiffened. "Here at the motel." Steve nodded, pacing the parking lot, muttering under his breath. Some guests complained he was making them nervous. Before he left, he said something about teaching old fools lessons. "We've got it on camera." I let out a slow breath. Anger tried to rise, but I pressed it down. "Can I get a copy?" "Already pulled the footage," Steve said, holding up a small USB drive. "You might want to show this to the police." When I closed the door, I stared at the little plastic stick in my palm. Proof. Not hearsay, not rumor, undeniable evidence of harassment on private property. I added it to my evidence folder, the collection growing into a wall Harry couldn't climb. That night, As I lay on the stiff motel bed, I replayed Steve's words in my mind, teaching old fool's lessons. It wasn't just bluster. It was the sound of a man cornered, lashing out before he lost everything. For years, I'd seen Harry's arrogance as a kind of childish entitlement. Now I understood it was rooted in desperation. The debts, the lies, the failed forgeries, every piece of his crumbling world pointed back to me as the obstacle. And desperate men are dangerous. The following morning, I walked into Detective Morrison's office with the USB drive and a detailed timeline of Harry's escalating behavior. He plugged it into his computer, and together we watched the grainy footage, Harry pacing near my door, his gestures sharp, his voice captured just enough by the microphone to hear the threat. Jim leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Clark, this is a clear pattern. Public outbursts, attempts to smear your reputation, now direct intimidation. Combined with the fraudulent loan attempt, I'd say you have grounds for a restraining order." "What would that mean?" I asked. "Legal prohibition against Harry coming within 500 feet of you or your property. If he violates it, we arrest him on the spot." I nodded slowly, relief mixing with the weight of finality. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was documented harassment, fraud, and intimidation. Harry had crossed from arrogance into criminal territory, and I had the evidence to prove it. As I left the station, the cold air bit at my cheeks, but my steps were steady. Harry had chosen the path of threats and lies. I had chosen the path of law and truth. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one being cornered. He was. By noon, I was back at the courthouse, the USB drive in my pocket, and Detective Morrison's written report in hand. The clerk stamped my petition with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the tiled halls. "This request qualifies for expedited review," she said matter-of-factly. "Given the documentation and the police report, you should have your restraining order signed by this afternoon." I thanked her and walked outside, the winter sunlight glaring off the courthouse windows. For the first time since leaving my home, I felt a measure of protection. No more pacing outside my motel door, no more threats in the dark. If Harry came within 500 feet of me, he'd trade his swagger for handcuffs. But fate wasn't finished with me yet. That evening, Detective Morrison called again, his tone grave. "Clark, there's something else you need to know. Harry consulted a lawyer last week about adverse possession laws. The term hit me like ice water. Squatters' rights, exactly. He wanted to know if he could claim legal ownership of your house after living there for several years. Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation. He's been there for 3. If you hadn't acted when you did in 2 more years, he might have tried to file a claim." I gripped the phone tighter. The house Martha and I had poured 20 years of love into the hardwood floors. We refinished the garden she planted. Harry had been plotting to steal it outright through legal technicalities. "Does he have any legitimate chance?" I asked, though my voice already carried the edge of dread. "None," Morrison said firmly. "Adverse possession requires hostile occupation without the owner's permission. You invited them to live there, and they never paid rent or property taxes. Legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. But it shows premeditation. This wasn't about a beer in your living room, Clark. He's been planning this theft for years." I sat heavily on the motel bed after we hung up Martha's photo on the nightstand beside me. The realization cut deeper than all the insults and demands. Harry hadn't just disrespected me, he had built a long-term strategy to erase me from my own legacy. At 4 o'clock, I returned to the courthouse and signed the final paperwork. The judge's signature made it official. Harry Thompson was legally barred from approaching me or the property. If he stepped so much as a toe on that lawn, the sheriff would handle him. Driving back to Pine Lodge, I watched the sun dip behind the Rockies, the sky painted in bruised shades of purple and gold. For years, I had mistaken my silence for peace. But silence without boundaries had only fed Harry's greed. Now the silence was different. It was backed by law evidence and a wall he couldn't climb. Harry thought he could take my dignity, my home, even my name. But all he had really done was awaken a man who finally understood the value of saying no. And this time, no court or creditor would side with him. The restraining order was barely a day old when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. On the other end was Mike Brennan, owner of Mountain View Auto, the dealership where Harry worked. His voice carried the weight of a man who didn't like what he was about to say. "Clark, I need to ask you something directly. Is it true what I've been hearing about Harry? That you paid for their house, the tuition, the wedding, and now you've cut them off?" I exhaled slowly. It's true. Every dollar of it. And when I refused to be treated like a servant in my own home, they gave me an ultimatum. So I left. Mike sighed. "Harry's been telling a different story. Claims you're unstable, that Tiffany's pregnant, and you've abandoned them." I let the silence settle for a beat. "Mike, you've known me for 20 years. You really think I'd walk away without cause? Detective Morrison has records of Harry's gambling debts, $18,000. And Bob Harrison at the bank has proof Harry forged documents to try and take a loan on my house." There was a long pause on the line, followed by a low whistle. "That explains a lot. Clark, I've had 3 customers this week alone mention Harry owes them money. One even recognized him from the casino. I can't have this tied to my dealership. Reputation is everything in this business." I didn't gloat, didn't press. I simply said, "I understand." "Effective today," Mike continued. "He's out. I'll be letting him go this afternoon. I wanted to hear it from you first, because the man's been spinning lies left and right. But now I've got no doubt who's telling the truth." When I hung up, I stared at the motel ceiling, the weight of justice sinking in. For years, I had been Harry's safety net, shielding him from consequences. Now those consequences were arriving one after another, and I didn't have to lift a finger beyond speaking the truth. That evening, I drove past the house I once called home. From across the street, I watched through the front window as Harry paced the living room, phone in one hand, the other flailing angrily. Tiffany sat slumped on the couch, her face, pale shoulders sagging under the weight of his fury. A cardboard box lay half-packed near the door, a silent testament to the storm that had entered their lives. The sheriff's deputy had already served the restraining order. Now Harry had no job, no steady income, and creditors breathing down his neck. His arrogance, once loud enough to fill my house, was collapsing into panic. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. The sight was enough. For once, it wasn't me rushing to patch the leaks in their roof. It was them scrambling in buckets of their own making. Driving back to Pine Lodge, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the dark, I realized something simple: a man doesn't need to raise his voice to fight. Sometimes the quiet removal of support is louder than any argument. And Harry was finally hearing that silence. The following morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee at Annie's Diner when my phone buzzed. Tiffany's number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came through frantic, higher-pitched than I'd heard since she was a teenager. "Dad, there are men at the house. Debt collectors. They're asking questions about assets, income, about everything. They say Harry owes $18,000. How is that possible?" I let her words hang for a moment, then answered calmly. "Because he does owe that much, sweetheart. Detective Morrison confirmed it. Most of it from poker at Glacier Peaks. The rest from loans he never paid back." There was a long silence, then a whisper. "He told me he was working overtime those nights. He said it was for us. I could almost see her sitting at that kitchen table, face pale, the world she thought she lived in, cracking wide open. "No, Tiffany," I said quietly. "It was never for you. It was for him. And for cards and dice and dealers who already knew his face." Her breath hitched the sound of a sob fighting its way out. "Dad, the sheriff was here too. He served Harry some kind of papers. He's been throwing things ever since." "What's happening?" "The restraining order," I explained. "It means Harry can't come near me or the house. He's just realizing his options have run out. Dad, he says he might leave town. He says there's nothing left here for him." Her voice cracked, torn between anger and fear. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my words. "Then you have a decision to make, Tiffany. You can follow him and his lies, or you can face the truth and rebuild. But you can't do both." The line went quiet, except for her breathing. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if I can handle this. You'll have to," I said, "because for 5 years I handled it for both of you. I paid your bills, carried your debts, and shielded you from reality. But that ended the night you told me to serve Harry or leave. I chose dignity. Now you must choose too." She didn't answer, just hung up. Later that day, I parked across from the house again. From my car, I watched as 2 different collection agency vehicles pulled into the driveway. One after another, stern-faced men stepped out, briefcases in hand. Through the window, I saw Tiffany's hands flying as she argued with Harry, his arms slicing the air with desperation. Whatever illusion of control he had left was slipping. Mrs. Patterson, my old neighbor, stepped onto her porch and caught my eye. She gave me a small, sad wave as if to say she understood. I didn't wave back. I just sat there watching the cracks widen in the home I had once built for Tiffany. For years, I had been the glue holding their lives together. Now without me, they were crumbling. And for the first time, she was seeing who her husband truly was. Not a provider, not a partner, but a man drowning in debts of his own making. By Wednesday morning, I had decided it was time to confront Tiffany directly. Not at the house, not with Harry looming in the background, but somewhere neutral. I called her cell and kept my voice firm. "Meet me at the diner. Just you. 2 o'clock. She hesitated. "I can't leave Harry alone right now. He's struggling." "Then we have nothing to discuss," I said. "The restraining order prevents me from being near him. If you want to talk, it has to be without him." A long silence followed, broken only by a faint sniffle. "We're Main Street Diner, back corner booth." When she walked in that afternoon, I hardly recognized her. Stress had carved shadows beneath her eyes, and her shoulders slumped under a weight she couldn't carry. She slid into the booth across from me, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling. "I know you're angry. But Harry's lost his job, and these collectors won't leave us alone. The phone rings constantly. We're drowning." I stirred cream into my coffee, giving her time to speak. When she fell silent, I leaned forward. "I'm offering you one chance, Tiffany. One chance to end this with some dignity." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, public acknowledgement of the truth? Full disclosure of what I've done for you and why I left? No more lies, no more excuses." Her lips parted, then pressed shut. "You want me to humiliate myself. I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference." She stared down at the table, her fingers twisting the napkin. What kind of acknowledgement? I'd rehearsed this moment. Church on Sunday during testimony time. A letter to the Tribune. A Facebook post visible to everyone. You tell them about the tuition, the wedding, the mortgage payments. You tell them about the ultimatum you gave me. You admit Harry, and you cross the line. Her face flushed shame creeping through her mask. Dad, people will think you had a father who sacrificed everything and a daughter who finally had the courage to admit she was wrong. That's what they'll think. She looked at me, then really looked, and for the first time I saw tears that weren't calculated. They weren't bargaining chips. They were the raw tears of a woman realizing she'd traded her father's love for a man's lies. "What about Harry?" she whispered. "Harry is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you stay with him, you lose me. That's your choice." Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. "And if I do what you're asking, then maybe over time we can rebuild something real. Not money, not dependence. Respect." She nodded slowly, as if the weight of those words pressed harder than all the debt collectors combined. "How long do I have Sunday?" I said. 10 o'clock service. If you're not there, I'll know you've chosen your path." As she left the diner, her shoulders bent and her steps uneven, I couldn't tell if she was walking toward redemption or ruin. All I knew was that for the first time in years, the choice wasn't mine to make. It was hers. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of Montana morning where the air felt sharp enough to cut. I pulled into the parking lot of St. Mark's Lutheran and sat for a moment in my Buick, watching the sanctuary fill. Word had already spread there was going to be an announcement. Whether Tiffany had the courage to stand up was still uncertain. Inside the church was fuller than I'd seen it in years. Neighbors, co-workers, even some faces from the diner, all sat in stiff pews, curiosity buzzing through the air. Pastor Williams began the service with hymns, but I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation, like a river rushing beneath a sheet of ice. When testimony time came, the silence was thick enough to hear the creak of wood as people shifted. My breath caught when I saw Tiffany rise from the back row. She looked small walking down the center aisle, yet every step carried a weight that seemed to steady her. She gripped the podium knuckles white and lifted her gaze to the congregation. "I need to tell you something important about my father." She began, her voice cracking but clear. "For the past 5 years, he has supported my husband and me financially. He paid for my college tuition over $160 so I could graduate debt-free. He paid $25,000 for my wedding when Harry's family couldn't. He gave us the family home where he had lived with my mother for decades, and when we couldn't cover the mortgage or groceries or insurance, he paid those bills too." Gasps rippled through the pews. Whispers rose and fell, but Tiffany pressed on her voice, gaining strength. 3 weeks ago, when my father refused to obey my husband's demands like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum: either obey Harry or leave his own house. He chose to leave, and her breath trembled. I stood by my husband. I chose wrong. The sanctuary was so quiet you could hear the stained glass windows rattle in the wind. Tiffany's tears rolled freely now, but her voice carried with surprising steadiness. "My father sacrificed everything to give me a better life, and I repaid him with disrespect. I'm standing here today because he offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. And I want you all to know I was wrong. He deserves gratitude, not ultimatums. Respect, not humiliation. Dad." Her eyes found mine across the pews. "I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness today, but I want to start earning it." When she stepped back from the podium, the congregation erupted, not with gossip, but with a low hum of support, nods, even quiet tears. Pastor Williams rose, his voice thick with emotion. "This is courage admitting when we have failed and honoring the dignity of others. Tiffany has shown it, and so has her father." I sat still, my chest tight. For once, I wasn't carrying her words on my shoulders. She was carrying them herself. And in that moment, the weight I had borne for years shifted back where it belonged. After the service, the sanctuary swelled with voices. Old neighbors shook my hand, some clasping it with both of theirs, as if to pass strength back into me. Pastor Williams hugged Tiffany at the front, whispering something that brought fresh tears to her eyes. When the crowd thinned, she approached me outside beneath the cold winter sun. And she said softly, "I've written the letter to the Tribune. It'll run Wednesday. And I'll post on Facebook tonight telling everyone the truth. I want to do this right." I studied her face, the same eyes that once lit up when she handed me dandelion crowns, now shadowed with regret, but carrying something steadier resolve. "That's good," I said quietly. "But you need to understand something, Tiffany. No matter what you do now, the house won't come back to you." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean it's already been transferred to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative? The will has been changed, signed, and filed with my attorney. That home will shelter families who know what sacrifice truly means." She staggered back, as though the words were a physical blow. "But Dad, it's our family home. Mom's garden, all of our memories aren't in the walls, Tiffany. They're in us. That house stopped being a home the day you and Harry told me to obey or leave. I chose to leave, and now I choose to give it to those who will honor it." Her lip trembled. "Even if I stand up, even if I tell the whole world how wrong I was, you've already decided yes." My voice was gentle but firm. "Because I need to know any relationship we rebuild isn't tied to inheritance. It has to be built on respect, not expectation." She looked away, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "Harry left last night," she admitted quietly. "Packed up and drove off while I was at work. No note. No plan. Just gone. I filed for divorce this morning, and when I checked the credit cards..." Her voice broke. "He'd been using mine too. The debts are worse than I thought." I let the silence linger, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let this be your first step. No more lies. No more debts you didn't choose. Stand on your own and prove to yourself and to me that you can." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, I saw the faint outline of the little girl who used to believe her father could fix any storm. But this time she wasn't asking me to fix it. She was asking how to fix it herself. 3 months later, I stood on the front lawn of what was once my home, watching 3 veteran families move into newly renovated units. Children ran through the yard, their laughter cutting the winter air, while Staff Sergeant Maria Santos shook my hand, with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Miller, this means everything to us. Thank you." I looked at the house one last time, not with regret, but with peace. It was no longer a burden. It was finally serving the purpose it was meant to, honoring sacrifice, not entitlement. Looking back, I realized the most painful betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones you love most. I spent years giving Tiffany and Harry everything I had: my money, my time, my home. In return, I was given ultimatums and humiliation. But when I finally chose dignity over dependence, I discovered something powerful. Boundaries are not abandonment. They are survival. Handing over my home to the Veterans Housing Initiative was more than an act of charity, it was a declaration. I would no longer let my sacrifices be twisted into shackles. That house now shelters families who understand what service and gratitude mean. And Tiffany, stripped of Harry's lies, is beginning to walk her own path toward honesty. Forgiveness may come in time, but trust must be rebuilt one step at a time. If you are a parent watching this, ask yourself, are you giving out of love or enabling out of fear? And if you are a child, consider whether you are honoring the sacrifices made for you or taking them for granted. Family is not about control or entitlement. It's about respect flowing both ways. Have you ever faced a betrayal in your own family like mine? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments, I'd like to hear it. And if this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, dignity isn't given, it's defended. Thank you for listening.